Thank you. There is a lag. All right, welcome back, folks. Friday, January 10th. We're taking a run through a bill introduction on H22. Yes. We have Representative Hedrick here from Burlington, and he is the lead sponsor of the bill. And welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the quick turnaround too.
Sure.
Yeah, I get an email. I think you and I sat down yesterday and I get an email that night saying, hey, you want to come and talk about this? I do. And thank you, members. We haven't met, not all of us, some of you, certainly. My name is Troy Hedrick. I'm a representative from Burlington, the section of Burlington kind of in and around the campus and the hospital. When I'm not doing this, I am a UVM staff member and work out of the Division of Student Affairs in the Dean of Students Office, doing student conduct work. The inspiration to this bill, I'm going to give you the origin story, kind of came out of that. So I just want to acknowledge up front that the rationale or my development of this bill came out of a conversation I had as a member of UVM Staff United. So let me give you that origin. I am a storyteller. That's kind of how I do this. So bear with me, and then I'll talk. And you all have a piece of paper that looks like this somewhere. So look for that. These are
It is an attachment that has been posted on our page.
Yeah, these are the bullet points that kind of summarize why I think this is an important bill. So H22. Let me tell the story. So, and the story originates in June, and I was here in the building. We were here for the veto override session. And I was really focused on a piece of legislation that we really wanted to see get across the finish line. So I was kind of tracking that and watching that, and my phone was blowing up. So when I finally kind of took a break to see what was going on, my messages were all from colleagues at UVM. I just got fired. I just got fired. I just got fired. I just got fired. And I can talk a lot about who those people were and why they are important to me. And I'm happy to do that with anybody who wants to hear that. That's really not the point of this conversation. But I knew these staff members well. Many of them had worked at UVM for decades. And they arrived to a Monday morning meeting to learn that without warning that they were not working at UVM anymore. Being a member of UVM Staff United, AFT union, we rallied pretty quickly, and a group of us started working to put together a severance package for these people, or leverage what we could to make sure that these folks had somewhat of a buffer. All of them, without exception, were in a position where they needed to find work immediately. So we wanted to give them a buffer package to the best of our ability. We did that. It improved to some degree from the first offer. We kind of wrapped that up, and I started asking myself, I wonder how these severance packages compare to some of the other severance packages that I know to have been put in place for higher level employees. When I started asking that question, I hit a bit of a brick wall, saying that's not public record, that's personal employment matter. We don't share that information. So I did a public records request, and I said, this is the information I'm looking for. And once again was told, that's not information that public record. And I said, great, who do I appeal to? They told me. I submitted my appeal, and I said, this is where my interpretation is, this is where your interpretation is. I do think that an extension of salary, an extension of benefits should be considered still salary and benefits, which is clearly defined as public record. They didn't agree with me. So that kind of generated my thought process in and around this bill. So what kind of comes out of that? So this became very quickly a matter of equity for me. How do people who are lower paid can't take a break from their work? They have to immediately find a new job, probably can't afford a lawyer. How does that compare to higher paid employees who might be able to take a longer break from their work, who might be able to afford a lawyer? How does that play out with regard to severance packages. So I think H22 addresses that. I think it clearly states that extensions of salary, extensions of benefits are salary and benefits still, and that those are for public employees, so that those are most certainly accessible by public records requests. I think that level of transparency is important. I think folks who are public employees and making earning their salary from public dollars, I think we have a clear accountability there. And I think the information that surrounds the departure of somebody who then gets a severance package should remain public information. I think this is ultimately will build trust between employers and employers. I think the likelihood that this protects the VLRB, which is Vermont Labor Relations Board, which is the place where grievances go. I think this can probably have an impact on the significant backlog that lands in VLRB right now. So I think that's important. And I think just in a general sense, accountability and fairness are key components to this bill. It's a pretty straightforward bill. There's not a lot there. I think, right, this is a labor issue, labor friendly. I'm hoping that there's some bipartisan support on this, tripartisan support on this. Feels to me like a pretty, in the parlance of our world, an easy lift. And it'll give you something to jump into immediately to, even if it's just to practice the process.
So I guess my first question, when you were to the specific situation where you kind of stumbled into this scenario, were you just totally shut out from access, or was it like redacted documents, a hard no?
Hard no, completely shut out. So right, this is one public entity. So the folks who are interpreting my question from that public entity said, no, the law currently protects us from having to share that with you. I disagree. So I'm seeking clarity for those laws.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you have any idea how many payouts, severance packages might be out there that folks don't have access to? Or is it just a dearth of...
Is it what?
Like a dearth of information. Do you have any idea how many severance packages might be protected by this?
In my situation, there's probably a handful that I would be interested to know more about, but I don't have like statewide data on how often this happens, or how often are employees released with a severance package. I don't have that data. I haven't looked in that data. Yeah. And again, I don't have any information on how many other public entities would have released that information. I don't have that either. I only know that in my world, somebody interpreted the current laws to say we don't have to share this with you. So let's clarify those laws. Again, that's based on the premise that salary extensions continue to be salary, benefit extensions continue to be benefits. I believe that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're just dipping our toes into this one. I mean, I appreciate your sentiment that it's easy, but nothing. Every bill introduction. This one's a piece of cake.
Just do it.
The floor.
Like a t-shirt cannon.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative, for the analogy. Fireworks and t-shirt cannons. It's a Friday.
Come join us.
So does anyone have any questions for Representative Hedrick with this? Like, we definitely want to talk to council and just get a little bit more insight on this. And how it basically, I want a better understanding of what the history on the statute that keeps these records private. I can't imagine this is the first time one of our committees has had a conversation about this. So my question ultimately is like, why is it this way now?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's like the big hanging question for me in the first conversation.
And how much has it evolved, right? I didn't do a deep dive into how many amendments that statute has and how long they've been. Yeah.
Okay.
I said easy lifting deep dive. Same. A little ashamed of that.
Well, there's underwater, right?
Just make sure you get to 30,000 feet first. Okay. Well, I thank you for your time. Thank you for the introduction. I don't think, if Tucker, do you have any working knowledge of like the history or context of this at all? Yes, that would be wonderful. So I think that's all we have for you for the moment, Representative.
Appreciate it.
Council, if you could.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Stop me if you want a deeper story. I love telling stories.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. First time in a long time. This is so exciting to be back in the seat with all of you. The chair asked if I had any working knowledge of the background behind 1 VSA Section 317, which is one section of the Public Records Act. And that section, in general terms, provides some functional definitions for the Public Records Act, including what a public record is and what a public agency subject to the act is. And then it is mostly comprised of subsection C. Subsection C provides the general exemptions from the Public Records Act, of which there are within that subsection, I believe, 43 subdivisions covering individual exemptions, one of which is the first exemption, which is any record that is confidential by law. And by law does not mean state law, it means by any law. And therefore extends through both state law and federal law. And I don't know why it would apply, but it includes international law. By the time you get to subdivision 4, you include anything that is confidential under a common law duty. So now we have common law, aka decisions of our courts going back to pre-colonial America into any decision that lasted through the British Empire into the founding of the United States. The enumerated list of exemptions that exist in the Vermont statutes annotated is now close to 283, let's say. There's an updated list under the reports tab on the General Assembly's website of those that exist just in state law. 1 VSA Section 317 has been amended numerous occasions, typically to add exemptions as issues around privacy become apparent, and the General Assembly notes them and eventually amends that section to add a new exemption to protect that privacy interest. The Public Records Act in general, and if you want an overview at some point, I have a very fascinating presentation about the Public Records Act and its history and application in Vermont. But an overarching thing that I bring up all the time with the committees is the Public Records Act has an overarching privacy proviso. And that means that the public agencies, unless they are mandated to keep something confidential, are put in the position of discretionary withholding. It could be, depending on the language used in an exemption, the entire record. It could be the redaction of specifically confidential information within the record. But the agency has to balance an individual's interest in privacy against the public's interest in the particular information. This will all be important when we do a walkthrough of C7, which is what Representative Hedrick's bill is targeting, because this has been the subject of litigation within the Public Records Act more than any other exemption in the PRA. And it is because of that balancing of privacy interests and the public's interest in information that is kept within agency files. The structure of C7 is very interesting. It is based off of Federal Freedom of Information Act exemptions governing personnel information. But when the Public Records Act was adopted by the Vermont General Assembly, they said, we don't want to do personnel. This should cover personal information, which has been interpreted as any information contained within an agency file that, if revealed, could cause an individual disgrace, harassment, loss of employment, or loss of friends. So this may be a light lift and a deep dive at the same time, because the way that this exemption gets applied is very nuanced. And by its nature and the guidance that attorneys have received from the Vermont Supreme Court, there isn't necessarily a standard way that you apply this exemption. It's fact specific, and it changes case to case. And it has been revisited on a few occasions, including the addition of some language around the salaries of public employees being public. So there's an open data portal that the state of Vermont has where you can view any employee's salary, and to ensure that the individual employee has access to their own personnel file and that it will not be withheld from them when they are no longer in employment. I could keep going, but I feel like it's probably a good place to stop.
All right. So, I mean, we've had this conversation in other contexts over time in this room with other access to sensitive data, sensitive information. If some folks perceive public access to be a little bit deeper than others, that's kind of the sticky wicket fundamentally. And just broadly speaking to these conversations, just to sort of set the table to newer members of this committee, this is one of the reasons I wanted to get into this, was to show like this like nuance. There's a lot of like different angles that touch on these things, right? When we're trying to balance our decisions on what is a open public record for the public good, and also what is to protect the individuals themselves and or those who are their management and employers and such. So yeah, this is an interesting one to kind of poke at as an early introduction to a bill of that nature. So trying to figure out frame my question. Explain to me a little bit, like when you were running down like the different aspects of the individual may be harmed, right? You even fell as far as to like friends. Like, how does that even, like, how is that defined in statute? Is it defined in statute?
It is not. So that language came from a Supreme Court of Vermont decision called Bellows Falls v. Trombley. And that was looking at specific employment records. I believe it was a school board and a school board member, their individual employment records. And that clause, you know, the court did articulate in that specific context where that standard may have been breached or crossed and where the information is exempt. I can't quite remember the details. The clause that is important and for Public Records Act practitioners imperative is the embarrassment, disgrace, harassment. Harassment, as far as public employees goes, that's typically, so full disclosure, I'm the records officer for the Office of Legislative Counsel, and through extension, almost all of the legislative offices. And then, of course, my services are available to every member of the General Assembly, including you all. So in my practice in that area, this is typically applied to prevent harassment. So, you know, personal information also includes your home address, your cell phone number, and a bunch of other personally identifiable information that is contained in agency records all over state government. And allowing access to that sort of information would most certainly lead to harassment. I won't say most certainly, potentially could lead to harassment, particularly when you're a public figure, and balance that against what is the value of the records officer releasing someone's home address.
Interesting.
What is the public interest there? So in the case of this particular bill in H22, the question that a practitioner would have before the language that is in here is, what is the individual employee's privacy interest in the severance package and the records related to it? And what is the public, not an individual member of the public, but the public at large, what is their interest in the information contained in the severance package? And if the records officer, who is sitting almost in a little bit of a quasi judicial capacity, like a little judge trying to be impartial, looking at this, they're going to weigh those two things. What is Joe Smith's interest, privacy interest in the information contained in these records about benefit extension versus what is the value to the public and their interest in that same information? And if the ledger tips and the privacy interest is far more weighty, they will either withhold information through redaction, or it sounds like in some cases withhold the entire record. And when you do some of the deep dive and we do the walkthrough, one of the things that I'll highlight is that the language used in an exemption is very important for the practitioners about whether they're going to redact or take the whole record and say you have no access to this record, period. Because the law is mandatory and it uses the term, tax filing. That's a articulated entire record. It's not a piece of information. I have to keep the whole thing private.
Funny feeling there was going to be a lot to this one.
We're just dancing in the shallows. This is, I'm so excited.
No, my curiosity is actually just really piqued as sort of this like subject matter, education and immersion. So, does anyone have any questions for council at the moment? Yeah. Okay, so it's Friday. It's the first week. I think I do want to poke at this a little bit more later, but today's not later. So I think we're good for now with this. But my curiosity is definitely up, just as the functionality and depth and breadth of the reach of this statute. So
Thank you very much.
thank you very much, council.
If Tucker's excited, you must be excited.
He just wants to push some carrots around.
We feed off each other sometimes. So, okay. Thank you, Representative, for that simple little poll. All right. Well, that's going to be the last formal order of business for the committee for the week. Thank you so much, everyone. We have a big start at 1 o'clock from 1 to 2 next week. We're going to start getting into that Bennington 1 conversation with the election. So I know I've said this off the record, informally to all of you, just just start poking around at that information. And just, when you get a little free time.
Develop a really strong opinion.
Yes, no, open minds. This is an interesting one because we're working off of a couple of the primary precedent has got a little bit of dust on it. So we're looking at a similar problem in a modern era. So and with that, thank you for the first couple of days.